When you enter a room, there is often a shift that precedes your words. You may not notice it at first, but if you have lived long enough with the burden and gift of empathy, you have felt it in your bones, a subtle tightening, as if the air itself is aware of your presence. Those who are sensitive will look at you with a strange familiarity, as if you remind them of something they had forgotten. Others will avert their eyes, or worse, they will bristle, resist, and soon turn against you without knowing why. This phenomenon is not merely social, nor is it reducible to jealousy or misunderstanding. It is something far more ancient, hidden within the currents of the unconscious. A dance of archetypes that have lived longer than any one of us. Empathy is not simply kindness, nor is it merely the ability to feel the suffering of another. It is a psychic aperture, an opening in the wall between self and other. The empath is like a living threshold through which the collective unconscious streams. When people sense this, they do not experience it as you, this individual, with your history, your name, your gestures, but as something archetypal. They feel exposed, as though their inner world is suddenly illuminated by a flame they never invited. And human beings, when confronted by an involuntary mirror, often retreat into fear, anger, or hostility. For who among us enjoys being stripped of the masks we have spent a lifetime carefully constructing? I have long studied this through the lens of projection. We must understand that much of what we perceive in others is not them, but ourselves, cast outward, like shadows upon a wall. The empathic presence, by its very nature, destabilizes this projection mechanism. Others sense that their shadow, the disowned, rejected, shame-filled parts of themselves cannot hide in your gaze. Your mere existence brings their own unconscious material closer to the surface. And so their psyche rebels. It is not you they resist, but the unbearable nearness of their own truth. Imagine, for instance, a dream. In the dream, you are walking through a vast cathedral at night, torch in hand. Every step you take echoes against the stone walls. As you pass, alcoves hidden in shadow are suddenly revealed. Within each alcove lies something half forgotten, an old statue covered in dust, a broken chalice, perhaps even the grotesque gargoyle watching you silently. These alcoves are the compartments of the human soul, and most people prefer them to remain dark. But when you, the empath, walk through the cathedral of their psyche, you carry the torch. Suddenly, what was concealed emerges into visibility. Do you see why they tremble? Why they turn away? Why they might even despise you? You have become a living reminder of their own hidden cathedral. This is not malice on their part, at least not consciously. It is instinct, a defense of the ego against what it cannot yet integrate. If they were to accept what you show them, their carefully ordered sense of self would collapse, and with it, the fragile scaffolding of their life. To turn against you is, paradoxically, to protect themselves from premature confrontation with their shadow. And yet, for the empath, This rejection feels deeply personal. You feel their resistance as rejection of your essence, when in truth it is rejection of their own. Empathy is power because it is presence. In our modern age, power is often imagined as control, domination, or possession of external resources. But the true power of the psyche has always been the power of presence. When someone stands before you without walls, resonating with the vibrations of your unspoken feelings, they embody a force that cannot be easily named. They become the archetype of the seer, the oracle, sometimes even the healer. Yet every archetype has its shadow, for the seer evokes not only trust but also terror. The same presence that consoles one person may awaken another's paranoia. This paradox is most visible in human relationships. You have likely seen how people are drawn to you at first, as if enchanted. They speak openly, confessing things they have never told another soul. They sense that you can hold their vulnerability, that you can see without judgment. In the warmth of your empathic field, they feel, for a moment, whole. But soon, the intensity of such intimacy overwhelms them. They realize they have revealed too much. They recognize that they are known, and the unconscious, terrified of such nakedness, retaliates. What once felt like love becomes suspicion. What once felt like safety becomes threat. They turn against you, not because you betrayed them, but because they betrayed themselves by allowing their masks to fall. Consider the archetype of the scapegoat. Ancient cultures instinctively knew what the modern world forgets, that those who carry collective burdens are often cast out. The empath, sensing more than is comfortable, becomes the vessel for what the group cannot face. In myth, the scapegoat was sent into the wilderness, bearing the sins of the community. In modern life, the empath is often exiled, emotionally, accused of being too much, too sensitive, or manipulative. These accusations are projections, born from the discomfort of those who cannot own their own shadows. By turning against you, they rid themselves of the intolerable weight of self-recognition. But let us go deeper. The empath is not merely a victim of this process. They is too have an unconscious, often empaths carry within them an ancient wound. They learned early in life that survival meant attunement to others' emotions. Perhaps they had a parent who was volatile, whose moods shifted like sudden storms. The child discovered that to anticipate these moods was to avoid catastrophe. This survival mechanism, repeated over years, became an extraordinary sensitivity. But beneath the gift lies trauma. Beneath the power lies fear. Thus, when people turn against the empath, it reactivates the original wound, the terror of abandonment, the pain of rejection, the memory of never being safe unless hyper-vigilant. So we see a cycle. The empath triggers others' shadows, which leads to rejection. That rejection reactivates the empath's wound, deepening their sensitivity, and thus the empath becomes even more potent, even more torch-like in the cathedral of the psyche. It is as though destiny itself conspires to sharpen the empath into an archetypal figure, yet the price of such sharpening is loneliness. This loneliness is not merely social isolation, it is existential. The empath walks among others but rarely feels at home. For to see deeply is to live at a distance from those who do not wish to be seen. And yet, paradoxically, it is through this exile that the empath begins to fulfill their role. The alchemist of the Middle Ages understood this principle, that the most precious transformation occurs in solitude, in the vessel sealed from outside interference. Likewise, the empath's exile becomes the alchemical vessel in which their own psyche transforms. But here's a hidden truth. When people turn against you, they are giving you a gift. They are revealing to you where their shadow resides. They are showing you the threshold of transformation, not only for them, but for yourself. Each reaction, each hostility, each act of betrayal is a mirror, not a mirror of your worth, but of the archetypal dynamic you carry. You are being shown the timeless pattern of human resistance to consciousness. To bear this without collapsing into bitterness is the true initiation of the empath. I want you to feel the depth of this, for it is not merely an idea but a lived reality. When someone once close to you withdraws, you feel a tearing in the heart. The mind rushes to explain. Perhaps I was too much. Perhaps I said the wrong thing. But beneath the mental chatter is a silence. And in that silence, an image arises. Perhaps it is the image of a wounded animal, lashing out at the hand that tried to soothe it. Or perhaps it is the image of a frightened child, hiding in the dark. These images are not about them alone. They are about the collective unconscious. They are about humanity's perpetual struggle to face itself. And you, empaths, have been chosen, though often unwillingly, to stand at the fault line of that struggle. Let us not romanticize this too quickly. It is not easy. To be empathic is to be pierced by the world again and again. It is to live without armor in a battlefield of egos. Yet within this wound lies the possibility of the sacred. The Christian mystics spoke of the stigmata, the wounds of Christ appearing on the body of the saint. Whether literal or symbolic, the meaning is clear. The wound is not merely suffering, it is participation in a mystery. So too with you, the wound of rejection, of being turned against, is also the mark of your vocation. It is the sign that you are part of a greater drama than the small theater of personal relationships. This is why you must learn not to take hostility personally. I do not mean to suggest indifference or apathy, but rather an understanding that when people resist you, they are resisting the archetype, not the individual. They resist the mirror, not the mirror holder. This distinction liberates you from the poison of self-doubt. You begin to see hostility as information, as symbolic communication from the unconscious. You begin to read betrayal not as proof of your unworthiness, but as a signpost pointing toward the deeper dynamics at play. And yet, to live in this awareness requires strength. You must cultivate what I call symbolic sight, the ability to perceive not only the literal event, but also the mythic pattern within it. When someone you love turns against you, you must ask what God has been invoked in this encounter. Is it the God of fear, the archetype of the betrayer, the shadow rising to protect itself. And what in me has been summoned in response? Is it my own wounded child, crying out for love? Or is it the deeper self, inviting me into a new level of consciousness? This symbolic sight transforms pain into initiation. We must also remember that empathy itself has a shadow. If you cling to your empathic power as identity, if you use it to manipulate or to avoid your own inner work, you fall into inflation. You become what you fear, the one who dominates unseen. True empathy is not control. It is presence without possession, seeing without seizing. This requires humility, the willingness to admit that even in your sensitivity, you too are blind in many ways. For every torch that reveals an alcove, there are 1,000 corridors you have yet to explore. Empathy is thus both cross and crown. The cross is the suffering of rejection, the loneliness of exile, the constant piercing by other shadows. The crown is the vision it grants, the intimacy with the depths of the human soul, the ability to witness the archetypal drama unfolding in real time. Few are called to carry this, and fewer still are able to bear it without breaking. But for those who do, life becomes not merely personal but mythic. Every encounter is charged with meaning. Every betrayal is a sacred script. Every turning against is part of the eternal dialogue between light and shadow. If we continue deeper into this labyrinth, we must recognize that the rejection you face as an empath is not accidental. It is structured into the very fabric of the human psyche. People do not only resist you as an individual, they resist what you awaken in them. The psyche is a fortress, and every fortress has its gates, its watchtowers, its soldiers prepared to defend it. When you step near with your subtle capacity to see, to feel, to pierce through their armor, the unconscious rings its alarms, defenses rise, sometimes without any clear provocation. You may say nothing at all, and yet you feel the walls forming, the sudden coldness, the inexplicable shift in atmosphere. This is because empathy is disruptive. It interrupts the fragile compromise most people make with their own shadow. The ego is like a diplomat, negotiating endlessly between the demands of the unconscious and the expectations of the external world. It builds fragile treaties, fragile alliances, fragile stories about who I am, you, as empath, with your gaze that reaches beyond the mask. Threaten these treaties, you expose the cracks in their narrative, and to protect the illusion, the ego prefers to cast you out rather than revise its story. This exile is archetypal. Recall the myths of Prometheus, who brought fire to humanity and was punished by the gods. Recall Cassandra, gifted with prophecy, but cursed never to be believed, condemned to isolation. These myths are not merely stories of the past, they live within us still. The empath embodies both Prometheus and Cassandra, the bearer of fire, of vision, yet condemned to rejection for the very gift they carry. When someone turns against you, you must remember you are not experiencing a trivial quarrel. You are stepping into a myth, and the myth, once recognized, offers you the possibility of liberation. But let us speak also of dreams, for the unconscious whispers most clearly through dreams, and the empath is often a dreamer, or at least one who resonates with symbolic images. Suppose you dream of standing by a river. The water's clear, reflecting the sky, and you see people gathered at its banks. You bend down to drink, and suddenly the people cry out in alarm, as though your act of drinking threatens them. You wake confused. Why would such a natural act be feared? Yet the dream is simple. Your act of drinking from the source, of touching the deep waters of feeling, terrifies those who have forgotten how to drink. They watch you and feel exposed, for your intimacy with the river reminds them of their thirst. Instead of following you, they reject you, for to drink would be to admit how long they have been parched. This is how empathy appears in the symbolic language of the psyche. Now, why does the empath often attract hostility, not only from strangers, but from the very people they love most? This is because intimacy magnifies projection. The closer someone stands to you, the more their unconscious seeks to place its unwanted fragments upon you. The partner who alternately adores and despises you, the friend who confesses and then withdraws, the family member who oscillates between neediness and accusation. These are not random patterns. They are archetypal dances of shadow and light, and you, by your empathic presence, become the stage upon which these dramas are played out. Do not mistake this for destiny in the sense of punishment. It is destiny in the sense of calling. You are called to witness these dynamics, not merely to suffer them, but to learn their language, for the unconscious is always speaking, even in hostility. The hostility itself is communication. When someone suddenly despises you, though you have done nothing to warrant it, you are witnessing the eruption of archetypal energy. Perhaps you have activated their inner persecutor. Perhaps your presence awakened the archetype of the abandoned child within them, and they lash out to avoid drowning in that vulnerability. Every rejection then is a cipher, a code to be read with symbolic sight, yet this sight is costly. To see symbolically requires that you detach from personal grievance, and this is difficult, for you are human. You feel the sting of betrayal, the ache of loneliness. Do not deny these. Feel them fully, for they too are part of the past, but let them pass through you like waves, and then look again with the eyes of the soul. Ask yourself, what is really being enacted here? Which archetype has entered the room? Which shadow is dancing behind their anger? The empath who learns this language ceases to be a victim of rejection and becomes a reader of the collective myth. And here lies the paradox. The more you learn to read, the more alone you may feel. For who can you speak to of these archetypal visions? Who will understand when you say, "It was not my friend who turned against me, but their shadow self who mistook me for its enemy"? Most will not understand. They will reduce your experience to ordinary misunderstanding, and in doing so, they will strip it of its sacred weight. Yet you must hold firm to your knowing. Empathy is not merely personal, it is transpersonal. It links you to the deep movements of the psyche that are larger than any individual. This brings us to a truth few wish to hear. The empath is not only a healer, but also a disruptor. Healing and disruption are twin aspects of the same force. When you heal, you bring light to the darkness. When you disrupt, you bring darkness to the light. Both are necessary. But most people only want the healing without the disruption, the comfort without the confrontation. They come to you for solace, but when they sense the deeper disruption, when they realize that true healing demands facing their shadow, they recoil. And so they turn against you, blaming you for the very thing their soul secretly longs for. At this point, many empaths fall into despair. They ask, why was I given this gift? If it only brings me isolation, why can I not simply live a normal life? The answer is that you were not called to normalcy. You were called to consciousness. And consciousness is never a comfortable path. It is always lonely, always demanding, always disruptive. To become conscious is to leave the herd, to walk into wilderness. You carry the fire of awareness into the dark, not for applause, but because the fire itself is your essence. Whether others gather to it or flee from it is not yours to control. You may recall the words I once spoke. One does not become enlightened by imagining figures of light, but by making the darkness conscious. This is the burden of the empath. You do not carry light to people so they can feel warm and comfortable. You carry light so they can see their darkness. And most do not want to see, thus, the hostility, thus, the rejection, and thus, your loneliness. But remember this, loneliness is also initiation. In the alchemical texts, the stage of nigredo, the blackening was the necessary beginning of transformation. All was reduced to ash, to chaos, to dissolution. In the same way, your loneliness is the nigredo of your path. Out of it will emerge the alchemical gold, the realization that your empathy is not for recognition, not for belonging, but for transformation. The loneliness strips away your illusions until you no longer need validation from those who cannot yet face themselves. You may feel at times that your gift is a curse, that it isolates you from the very love you long for, but in truth, it is leading you toward a higher form of love, not sentimental, not dependent, but archetypal, the love of the self, which embraces shadow and light alike. When you stand rooted in this deeper love, the turning of others against you no longer shakes you. You see it for what it is, the drama of their own unconscious, enacted upon the stage of your presence. And though it hurts, you no longer collapse beneath it. You stand, you witness, and you remain whole. So the question becomes, how do you bear this path without breaking? The answer lies not in closing your heart, nor in diminishing your gift, but in rooting yourself in your own shadow. For the danger of the empath is to identify too much with the light, to see oneself as the perpetual healer, the perpetual comforter. This is an inflation, and it leads to exhaustion, martyrdom, even bitterness. You must remember that to have darkness, you to carry aggression, envy, rage. Desire. To deny these is to become ungrounded, to float dangerously above the earth. But when you integrate them, when you recognize your shadow as part of your wholeness, you are no longer pierced so easily by the projections of others. You can hold their hostility without drowning in it, because you have already met your own. Thus, the empath's true initiation is not into endless giving, but into integration. You must know yourself fully, your shadow, as well as your light. Only then can your empathy become not a wound bleeding endlessly into the world, but a chalice capable of holding both suffering and transformation. And so, when they turn against you, remember, it is not failure, it is the sign that your presence has touched something deep. Do not run from it. Do not collapse under it. Stand in it, see it symbolically, and let it refine you. For in the end, the empath is not here to be loved by all, but to awaken the few who are ready, and the rest, those who resist, those who recoil, they too are part of the mystery. For even in their rejection, they shape your path, carving you into the vessel you were meant to be. When you begin to perceive the hostility of others as archetypal, you also begin to see betrayal differently. Betrayal is not merely a personal wound, it is one of the oldest dramas in the psyche of humankind. Every myth, every religion, every ancient tale contains its moment of betrayal. Christ was betrayed by Judas, Caesar by Brutus, heroes by those they trusted most. Why do these betrayals resound so powerfully through history? Because betrayal is the shadow twin of intimacy. It is only those who have drawn near who can turn against us. The stranger cannot wound us deeply, for they have no claim upon our heart. But the friend, the lover, the companion, when they turn, the cut is archetypal, and the soul trembles as though it has touched eternity. For the empath, betrayal is frequent. You invite people into closeness, not because you seek it, but because your very presence calls it forth. They reveal themselves, they disarm, and for a time they feel safe. Yet, when the shadow arises, they often project it upon you. In that moment, you shift in their eyes from trusted companion to perceived threat. This is the paradox of empathy. It draws people in, but it also ignites the very fears that cause them to flee. You stand in the role of the healer, and suddenly you are cast into the role of the betrayer. It is as if you are forced to embody the archetype they most dread, simply because you stand near the raw edge of their unconscious. In dreams, betrayal often appears symbolically as a feast gone wrong. Imagine you are sitting at a long table filled with food, friends and family surround you. At first there is laughter, warmth, the joy of communion, but suddenly the faces shift. The laughter turns to mocking, and you realize you are no longer guest, but prey. The feast was never for nourishment, but for sacrifice, and you are the one laid upon the altar. This is how the empath experiences betrayal in waking life. The transformation from intimacy to isolation, from cherished guest to scapegoat. The psyche dramatizes this because betrayal is never only personal, it is the eruption of an archetype that lives deep within the collective. But what is the meaning of this for you? Why must the empath suffer betrayal more than others? It is because betrayal strips you of illusions. It forces you to confront not only the shadow of the other, but your own longing to be seen, your own hunger for safety, your own dependence upon being understood. Each betrayal is an initiation into solitude, into self-reliance, into the capacity to stand in your own truth without needing constant validation. Painful though it is, betrayal is the alchemical fire that burns away your attachments. Leaving behind the essence of your vocation, do not mistake this as justification for cruelty. Betrayal is a wound, and wounds must be acknowledged. Too often, empaths rush to forgive, to excuse, to explain away the hostility of others. They say they did not mean it. It was only their shadow. I must not take it personally. But the psyche does not heal by denial. The wound must be felt fully, with all its agony. Only then can it be transformed. To carry empathy is not to bypass your own humanity. You, too, must weep, rage, and grieve. To pretend otherwise is to fall into spiritual inflation. The empath who denies their own pain becomes brittle, a vessel that cracks under the weight of unconscious suffering. But the empath who feels their wound, who holds it in the chalice of awareness, transforms it into wisdom. Now let us speak of loneliness, for it is the constant companion of the empath. Loneliness is not only the absence of others, it is the confrontation with your own depth in the absence of distraction. Most people avoid this confrontation by filling their lives with noise, with endless chatter, with busyness. But the empath, exiled again and again by rejection, is forced into silence. And in that silence, something remarkable happens. You begin to hear the voice of the self. The self, in Jungian language, is not the ego, but the totality of the psyche, the union of conscious and unconscious, light and shadow, personal and archetypal. When you are abandoned by others, you are pushed toward the self. Loneliness becomes the doorway to individuation. This is why so many mystics, prophets, and visionaries walked alone. Their path was never the path of the herd. Moses in the desert, Buddha beneath the tree, Christ in the wilderness. These are not mere historical events, but archetypal patterns. Each represents the necessity of solitude for transformation. So too with you, your empathic power will never find easy acceptance in the marketplace of human egos. It will lead you into wilderness, into nights of despair, into moments when you question the very meaning of your existence. But these are not signs of failure. They are signs that you are walking the archetypal path of individuation. In one of my patients' dreams, a woman found herself in a vast forest at night. She wandered alone, hearing the distant howls of wolves. Fear consumed her. Yet, as she walked deeper, she found a clearing where a great tree stood, glowing with an inner light. Beneath its branches, she felt both terror and peace, as though she had entered the heart of the mystery. This dream is the journey of the empath. The wolves are the hostility of others, the fear of rejection. The forest is the loneliness, and the glowing tree is the self, waiting to be encountered in solitude. But I must tell you this: the moment you begin to root yourself in the self, the hostility of others will shift. Some will still turn against you, but you will no longer experience it as personal destruction. It will no longer pierce you as it once did. Instead, you will see it as part of the eternal play of archetypes. You will witness without collapsing, and in this witnessing, you will discover a strange freedom. For when you are no longer dependent upon others to confirm your essence, you become untouchable. They may turn against you, but you remain whole. There is another dimension here we must not neglect. The collective unconscious is not passive, it seeks balance. When someone resists your empathy, they are not only resisting you, they are serving the psyche's attempt to preserve equilibrium. Too much light, too quickly, can be destructive, just as the eyes recoil when blinded by sudden brightness. So too does the psyche recoil when forced to face its shadow without preparation. Their hostility is, in a paradoxical way, protective. It is the psyche's way of saying, not yet, not now, the soul is not ready. When you understand this, you begin to carry patience. You realize that rejection is not always final. It may be a stage, a necessary pause in the larger process of transformation. And so the empath learns the wisdom of timing. You cannot force awakening upon another. You cannot demand that they accept what they are not yet ready to see. To do so is to play the tyrant, to betray your own humility. Your task is not to awaken everyone, but to remain faithful to the torch you carry. Some will flee from the light, others will turn against you. A few, perhaps, will walk with you into the clearing, into the mystery. These few will be your true companions, your soul kin. You may meet only a handful in your lifetime, but with them, the intimacy will be deeper than anything ordinary friendship can provide. For they, too, will have faced their shadow, and in that mutual recognition, there is no longer fear. Let me return to the question that began our reflection. Why do people turn against you the moment they sense your empathic power? They turn because empathy unveils what they have buried, what they have denied, what they are not ready to see. They turn because the unconscious is wise enough to resist premature revelation. They turn because betrayal, rejection, and hostility are archetypal necessities in the journey of individuation, and they turn because your path is not to be embraced by all, but to walk faithfully with the few who are ready. You must therefore make peace with this dynamic. Do not chase acceptance. Do not dilute your presence in order to be less threatening. Do not extinguish your torch to remain in someone else's darkness. To do so would be to betray your own essence. Instead, stand firm in the knowledge that rejection is not proof of your unworthiness, but proof of your vocation. It is the mark of those who carry the archetype of the seer, the healer, the empath, and though it is lonely, though it is painful, it is also sacred. One day, perhaps, you will look back on the betrayals, the exiles, the nights of despair, and you will see them not as failures but as initiations. You will recognize that each turning against was a step deeper into your own wholeness, each wound a gateway to greater vision. You will understand that the hostility you endured was not the end of love, but its hidden beginning, for it forced you to discover the love of the self, the love that cannot be taken, cannot be betrayed, cannot be destroyed. This is the crown hidden within the cross, the gold hidden within the ashes, the wholeness hidden within the wound. There comes a moment in the life of every empath when the pattern becomes unmistakable. Again and again, you find that those you love most, those you wish to help, those who seem drawn to your presence, eventually recoil. You are left bewildered, asking, why does this always happen? Why does my gift invite closeness only to be followed by distance? Warmth only to dissolve into coldness. And in this repeated pattern, you are tempted either to shrink away from your nature or to harden your heart against others. Yet, both temptations are illusions. For the true task is not to reject your essence, nor to armor yourself in bitterness, but to transmute this pattern into wisdom. You see, the hostility you encounter is not a verdict upon your worth, but an initiation into your sovereignty. To be sovereign, in the Jungian sense, does not mean to rule over others, but to rule within, to stand as the conscious center of your own psyche, no longer dependent on the unstable mirrors of the collective. Most people live their entire lives enslaved by projection, tossed about by the opinions and reactions of others, but you, by enduring the constant rejection of your empathic gift, are forced to seek a different foundation. You are forced to discover that the only true anchor lies in the self, and once you have rooted yourself there, you become untouchable. Think of the archetype of the alchemist. The alchemist did not begin with gold. He began with base matter, often something despised or cast aside. Through fire, dissolution, and recombination, the matter was transformed into something precious. So too with you, the betrayals, the rejections, the accusations, they are the base matter of your path, painful, humiliating, often unbearable. Yet, through the fire of your awareness, through the solitude of your reflection, they are transmuted into wisdom, into resilience, into sovereignty. You are not destroyed by the fire, you are refined by it. This is why you must not run from the hostility of others. Do not chase it, but do not fear it either. Each turning against is part of the alchemical fire. Each betrayal is a crucible, each rejection is a furnace. And within these furnaces, your true gold is being formed. The empath who understands this ceases to live as a perpetual victim and begins to walk as an initiate. You begin to see rejection not as curse, but as catalyst. Not as evidence of your unworthiness, but as the necessary stage of your transformation. But let us go deeper still. Empathic power is not only a mirror, it is also a reminder of the forgotten sacred. In your presence, others remember dimly, unconsciously, that there is more to life than their masks, their roles, their endless distractions. They feel the stirrings of the soul, and this frightens them, for to feel the soul is to awaken longing. and longing always destabilizes the comfortable prison of the ego. Thus, they turn against you, not because you are too little, but because you are too much a reminder of what they have buried. You are the whisper of the forest in a city of stone, the flicker of the eternal in a world addicted to the temporary. And the world, when confronted with the eternal, trembles. This is why the empath so often resembles the archetype of the prophet. The prophet is rarely welcomed in their own land. The prophet speaks truths that unsettle, embodies a presence that cannot be contained, sees patterns others prefer to ignore. And the reaction, more often than not, is hostility. Yet the prophet does not exist to be liked. They exist to remind humanity of the deeper currents beneath ordinary life. You too carry this archetype in miniature. When others sense your empathic power, they sense the prophetic presence within you, and their ego resists. But the resistance itself is proof that your presence matters. In dreams, this often appears as the motif of the hunted one. Perhaps you dream of walking through a village, and suddenly the people gather, their eyes filled with suspicion, their voices rising in accusation. You have done nothing, yet you are pursued, cornered, perhaps even condemned. Such dreams reflect the empath's experience in waking life. The unconscious dramatization of being scapegoated, cast out, rejected. But if you stay with the dream, if you continue to follow it, sometimes another image arises. The hunted one finds a hidden path into the forest where a great light waits. The rejection of the village becomes the doorway to the sacred. The exile becomes the initiation, and so it is with you. When others turn against you, they unwittingly guide you towards the forest, towards the self, towards the deeper mystery. Your loneliness, though it feels unbearable, is the very path by which you encounter your own wholeness. Without their rejection, you would remain entangled in the illusions of belonging, forever seeking validation from those who cannot truly see you. But through their rejection, you are forced into solitude, and in solitude, you discover the one presence that can never turn against you, the self. Yet sovereignty does not mean withdrawal from the world. It does not mean living forever in isolation. Once you have rooted yourself in the self, you can return to the world with new strength. You no longer need to beg for acceptance, for you carry acceptance within. You no longer fear hostility, for you understand its archetypal roots. You no longer collapse under betrayal, for you know it as initiation. You return not as one who pleads for love, but as one who radiates it naturally, without condition. And paradoxically, it is in this state that true relationships become possible, for only when you no longer cling to others for validation can you meet them as they are, free of demand, free of illusion. This is the ultimate secret of empathic power. It is not given to you to make you dependent upon others, but to make you whole in yourself. Others may turn against you, but in doing so, they free you from the tyranny of their approval. They force you to find the eternal ground within, and once you have found it, you become like a tree rooted by deep waters. Storms may rage, winds may howl, but you remain steady. Your branches reaching towards the sky. Perhaps you ask, but what of love? Am I condemned to solitude forever? No, you are not condemned, but you are transformed. The love you will know is not the ordinary love that clings and fears, but the archetypal love that flows from wholeness. When you meet another who has faced their shadow, who has walked their own wilderness, the bond will be unlike anything you have known. It will not be built on projection or need, but on mutual recognition of the self. Such connections are rare, but they are worth a lifetime of waiting. And in the meantime, you are never without love, for the self is the wellspring of love itself. And once you are rooted there, you drink from it endlessly. So when people turn against you, remember this. It is not your end, but your beginning. It is not evidence of your weakness, but of your power. It is not punishment, but initiation. You are not here to be embraced by all, but to stand as a witness to the mystery of the soul. Some will hate you for it. Some will flee. Some will betray. But a few, just a few, will recognize in you what they have longed for in themselves, and with those few, the intimacy will be deep enough to justify the long years of loneliness. In the end, empathy is not about being loved. It is about being true, true to the self, true to the archetype that lives through you, true to the fire that was placed in your hands. Carry it faithfully. Do not hide it. Do not extinguish it. Do not trade it for approval. For though the world may turn against you, the self never will. And in that union, you will discover the wholeness for which your soul has always longed. And so I say to you, when the rejection comes, when the betrayal cuts, when the loneliness presses in, do not despair. These are not signs that you are lost, but signs that you are walking the archetypal path of the empath, the path of the seer, the path of the one who feels the soul of the world. It is a hard path, yes, but it is also the most sacred, for in the end, you will discover that what others turned against was never truly you. It was the mirror of their own shadow. And what you discover in their absence is the eternal presence of the self, the ground of all being, the love that cannot be taken away. This is the gift hidden within the rejection, the crown hidden within the cross, the gold hidden within the fire. Walk it faithfully, and though the world may turn against you, you will never be forsaken, for the self is with you always, and in that union, you are whole.